afternoon, and welcome back to Health Leaders, the Winning Edge program. This is a weekly series of webinars touching on the topics and strategies that you need to know most. My name is Marie DeFreitas, and I'm the Senior Finance Editor for Health Leaders, and I'm going to serve as your moderator for today's session. So today's webinar is titled The Winning Edge for Investing in Technology. Thank you to our audience for participating. Before we get started, for those of you in the live program, I just have a few housekeeping details. So just note that an on-demand version of the program will be available on our YouTube channel on Friday, and that can be accessed through our website, healthleadersmedia.com. So to ensure that you can see all of the all of the content for today's event, please maximize your event screen window and just be sure to adjust your computer volume settings or your PC speakers for optimal sound quality. Next, you're going to find a resources list in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Here we have listed the webinar slide deck and some additional materials for you to download, along with the registration link for future Winning Edge events. And at the bottom of your console, there are multiple widgets you can use. If you want to submit a question, you can click on the little Q&A widget. It may already appear and be open on the left side of your screen. And you can submit questions at any time during the presentation. However, just please note that it's likely your questions will not be answered until the Q&A portion at the end of the program. So finally, should you experience any technical difficulties during today's program and you need assistance, go ahead and just click on that little help widget, which has the little question mark icon, and this will cover all of your common technical issues. So at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for today's fireside chat. We have Lynn Ansley, who is the Vice President of Revenue Cycle Management at Moffitt Cancer Center. Thank you, Lynn, for joining us today for this discussion. And before we hop in, Lynn, if you could just give us a little bit of your background and what you do at Moffitt.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everyone for listening in. My name is Lynn Ansley. I'm the Vice President of Revenue Cycle at Moffitt Cancer Center. Moffitt's located in the nice, hot, and steamy Tampa, Florida. We are an NCI designated comprehensive cancer center. My role at Moffitt encumbers about 600 team members that are responsible for the billing and collections for our technical, professional, and clinical research revenue cycle. I've been here a little over 12 years in various roles, both in the internal audit side of the house, moving into revenue cycle operations, and now I deal with all of the people, process, and technology for revenue cycle.
Awesome. Thank you, Lynn. All right. And with that, we will dive into today's discussion. So with our topic, we're talking about investing in technology, specifically focusing on the revenue cycle a little bit today. So Lynn, revenue cycle leaders are often at this intersection of finance and operations. So how are you working with your CFO and your CIO to evaluate technology investments that support both the financial performance, but also patient access, but particularly in your complex environment of oncology care?
Yeah, well, in revenue cycle, we measure everything. And traditionally, revenue cycle does report up through the CFO umbrella. That is the case here at Moffitt. We're very fortunate that our CFO actually used to be the Vice President of Revenue Cycle and has a really good understanding of how we put together our business case to justify technology spend. I also have a very close relationship with our CIO and all of our IT teams that partner with us through implementations. What I would say is when we go to approach a new technology at Moffitt, we are a not-for-profit. So we need to really justify the return on investment in hard dollar savings to the organization. Building a business case that's easy to understand, that highlights both the investment of resources to get the technology up and running and then the ongoing support is really important. Oftentimes what I'll find is we might have multiple variations in working with both of our finance teams and our technology teams to really build a business case that makes sure that the technology spend is what's best for Moffitt. And I think over time, understanding how we are measuring the output of the technology and linking it back to institutional metrics that everyone in the organization is responsible and accountable for is really, really critical. Oncology care is expensive. A lot of times when it comes to technology that we're exploring, oncology is not something that is, first to market. It's something that, a lot of startups wait and they explore when they're further down in their path of maturity. So we also have to be really realistic in how much additional lift our teams are going to have to do to get a product live and successful.
Definitely. That makes sense. Yeah, you're definitely dealing, I think, with bigger numbers in oncology care. So it's definitely, yeah, a lot to take in. Sorry, let me go to our next slide. So Moffitt, talk to me about high cost treatments. Obviously, Moffitt deals with a lot of that, and then prior authorizations for these high cost treatments. So how are you guys leveraging things like predictive analytics or AI to streamline reimbursement, reduce denials, and also ensure timely cash flow?
Yeah. Well, our financial clearance unit is definitely a success story of our revenue cycle here at Moffitt. I'll give a little bit of what we're doing in that space, and then I'll talk about how we plan to leverage AI a little bit further than we are today. But in our financial clearance unit, we have a tremendous amount of volume that comes through, a lot of very costly treatments when you're talking about chemotherapy and radiation. And our volume keeps growing as we're expanding our footprint further and further across Florida. What we've done historically for the last decade is really focus on the more traditional RPA. A lot of this is actually rules-based automation that stems from what we find in the denials trends on the back end. Before we started all of our automation around that, we actually took a look and shuffled around where the resources lived. And I want to link that because I think it's really important to not just look at technology in a silo, but to figure out the people in the process that then lead to successful implementation of technology. And so within the prior authorization space, over the last 3 fiscal years, we've gone from, a volume that's about 48% automated to 61.6% automated as of our last June 30 fiscal year end that we just closed. That's while the volumes are, doubling over the last 7 years. And so I bring that up because we aren't as advanced in the predictive denials in the authorization space, but we have what I would say really finesse the process in terms of how we're leveraging people and technology in that process. And I want to give another just looking forward where we're looking to go. So with oncology prior authorizations, a lot of clinical information is required to get the authorization approved prior to service. A lot of times this involves a clinical peer-to-peer that needs to happen between the provider and the payer. With that, a lot of times there's trends in that data that we could use AI to help guide us in that process because a peer-to-peer requires a higher level skill set, a clinical skill set that is highly compensated resource for a revenue cycle team. And so that's where we're looking to go in the future, is using AI to help enable those team members to work top of license and really go into those conversations geared with the information they need to get a prior authorization denial overturned. And then I'll say just one other thing in terms of, back-end denials. We also have our prior authorization team work any denials related to the prior authorization process, whether it be eligibility, prior authorization itself, or any sort of coordination of benefits. And the beauty of that is it's the same team that's doing the upfront process and working the back-end denials. And that then enables us to automate and think about using AI to really prevent, not just predict the denials, but to put prevention controls in place to avoid them completely.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's definitely sounds like a sound strategy, kind of focusing on the preventing versus like the aftermath. I remember you were on the show before and you spoke about the concept of having a technology empowered workforce. And I think that's a great example of like looking in the specific ways that you can utilize it to help your team.
Absolutely.
So one big challenge in revenue cycle specifically has been fragmented tech stacks. And so can you share a little bit about how your organization is kind of transitioning to more unified platforms and what impact that might have on performance metrics like days in AR or cost to collect?
Absolutely. So we have a lot of different technology at Moffitt, and specifically technology that doesn't necessarily integrate well with each other. And so over the years, we've really tried to integrate the systems by using traditional RPA to link up data from one system to another. I would say every organization is looking at, doing EHR due diligence, whether it's exploring new systems or looking at functionality within their system that they might not be fully utilizing. That is a constant, continual process for us here at Moffitt in the revenue cycle because it links directly to our cost to collect. So I love cost to collect. Anyone that deals with revenue cycle knows exactly what that means, but in case we have others in the audience, cost to collect is really just how much does it cost in operating expenses to collect cash collections? And you want that percentage to be lower because that means that it's costing you less to bring cash in the door. And at an organization like Moffitt, that means we're able to invest more cash into research to find a cure for cancer. And that is our mission here at Moffitt. It's to contribute to the prevention and cure of cancer. I'll take that one step further. In the revenue cycle, our whole purpose is to optimize reimbursement to find a cure faster. And so things like cost to collect are really important metrics, and it can't just be a revenue cycle known metric. It also has to be known across the organization. So I'll link it back to technology. When there's a new technology that we're looking to explore, what we always start with is how is it going to impact our cost to collect? And how does that cost to collect then impact the overall financial metric of the organization? For some, it's going to be things like EBITDA. And so cost to collect is our largest. Obviously, we track a lot of different metrics like days in AR, like AR less than 120 days, our denial rates, our discharge not final bill. All of those are key indicators that we've been actually tracking and advertising across Moffitt since about our fiscal year 2017. So we're really mature in the understanding of the organization on why those are the driving metrics and how those drive the success of the revenue cycle and then Moffitt's mission.
Definitely. I know I write more kind of about finance versus revenue cycle, but would you say for organizations kind of looking to transform their revenue cycle with a new technology, is cost to collect, should that kind of be like top of the list, do you think, all the time?
I would say absolutely yes. Now, the way that cost to collect is tracked when it comes to technology does have varying definitions organization to organization. What I always encourage revenue cycle leaders to do is get your baseline and then know when you're implementing a new technology, what are those savings? So if you're saving FTEs by implementing a technology, that's going to have a positive impact on your cost to collect. We run really lean here in revenue cycle. We always look to either add automation or augmentation in addition to our FTE count. So we've actually maintained consistent FTEs over the past 4 years, even with increasing volumes. And we have about equivalent of 471 FTEs of our RPA automation or traditional emulators supplementing our team. I would say, though, sometimes we get hung up on how many FTEs will a technology help us avoid hiring in the future. I think that focus needs to get expanded because sometimes you need to make an investment in technology to help your workforce work smarter. And it might not reduce your FTEs, but it might increase your cash collection and reimbursement accuracy. So you really have to look at it holistically. It can't just be one or the other.
That's a good point. Yeah, kind of zooming out, making sure you're still paying attention to the whole picture, for sure. So I wanted to touch on cybersecurity a little bit because cybersecurity, I mean, it's been a topic for a while, but I feel like we're seeing more of these cyber attacks happen more often. And these breaches really, compromise not only financial data, but also patient trust. So how are you as a revenue cycle leader involved in the organization's cybersecurity strategy? And do you think revenue cycle should be more embedded in those discussions alongside the CFO and the CTO?
Absolutely. So if we rewind time to February of 2024, there was a big breach that a lot of people know about and were impacted about. I think if you ask me as a revenue cycle leader and in talking to a lot of my peers, we were not prepared for that. We were very reactive. So the silver lining that comes out of something so impactful to organizations is you start planning for the next one. And so as a whole organization, our cybersecurity team has really started over the last 2 years, I would say, getting proactive in terms of what are our downtime procedures, doing tabletop exercises. It's at all levels of the organization now. So it started with our executive leadership teams coming together and talking about, if everything went down today, could we run operations? When you get in a room with executives and you start having those conversations, you realize how reliant your operation is on technology, right? From logging in to checking a patient in to being able to code and bill. And from a patient perspective, there's a lot of information in the news in terms of these cybersecurity attacks. So they are very sensitive to their personal information getting leaked. From a Red Cycle perspective, what we're doing here at Moffitt is over the last 12 months, we've really put together every process, every technology solution, and we're preparing for if our systems were to go down. So I'm really proud of this work. It is a lot of work. So I don't want to underplay that, but we have had the support of our cyber teams. As an organization, we have a larger tabletop exercise going on. You can never be 100% ready, but I would say we're doing pretty good. And this is something that as a revenue cycle, as we're moving into our new fiscal year, we plan to do these exercises quarterly to make sure that process changes, technology changes, people changes, we're still ready if anything shifts in that process.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good point. I feel like it's something that definitely the whole organization really kind of needs to be on the same page with this because it touches everyone in the organization.
Absolutely. And from a revenue cycle perspective, if you can't get claims out the door, you can't bring cash in the door. And then you're starting to talk about how are you going to react as an organization to that? I will say one of the things we've learned, and this might be relatable to other revenue cycle leaders in different climates as well, but Moffitt Cancer Centers in Florida, we get hit by hurricanes very, very often this time of year, moving into fall. So the way that we prepare for downtime had a lot of similarities to the way that we prepare for hurricane closures. And so I say that because I'm sure that in other parts of the country, you prepare for a natural disaster in a similar way to how we prepare for a natural disaster here, which links to how we prepare for a cyber disaster in terms of technology.
Right. That's a good point. As someone, as someone from Florida, I get that analogy or sympathize with it. I wanted to hop back to the topic of AI for a second. As AI tools become more prominent in areas like prior authorization, automation, or coding, how do you approach budgeting and scaling these tools responsibly to ensure both return on investment but also compliance?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I think as revenue cycles, we often do this wrong. We try to get a business case together to justify the ideal future state 3 years from now when we're fully scaled on a new technology. The approach that I've been taking, especially in these spaces now, is, what's ready for prime time? What is off the shelf going to have an ROI in the same year that the implementation cost is recognized? That's important because linking back to your first question, how do we work with the CFO? The CFO wants to know if we have an outlay of cash from an implementation perspective, how quickly are you going to measure the ROI that's going to offset that outlet of cash? And so that's what we've been trying to do. We also are really clear if we are going into a technology spend with something that is already live in other oncology centers. Being oncology, again, going back to some of the more startup companies that haven't been around for a while, they don't necessarily start in the complex oncology workflows because it's not as scalable to as many clients. So what I look to do if we're looking for something that is not what I would call off the shelf is we need to assess how long we have to get an ROI, what is that spend, and then we'll go into our contracting with the partner knowing that we're going to look at it a little bit different so we can make sure that we have key milestones along the way of implementation to ensure we're marching towards having a return on investment. And then once you're live, making sure that you continue to track that. I think that's really important because a lot of times as a revenue cycle or as an organization with any technology ask, you do a lot of work on the front end building a business case and estimating a return on investment to get the approval to move forward. On the back end, if you make tracking the ROI difficult, a lot of times it will just go by the wayside. And so this is one of the things with our partners that I'm really clear about. I need an easy way to track a very measurable ROI. One, to justify it before implementation, but two, to justify the continuation and the continuation of scaling into more spend. And I would say don't overcomplicate it, because the more complicated you make this reporting, you lose your audience.
No, that's a good point, especially about the milestones within tracking, and we'll get into more of that too in a second. But for the next question, I wanted to ask, or I guess touch on more of that collaboration aspect again for a second. Technology investments can sometimes fail, I think, because of poor alignment between clinical and financial and IT, with all of them having different priorities. So how do you ensure that the revenue cycle's needs are represented early and often to capital planning conversations with your CFO and your CIO?
I think we do a really great job of this at Moffitt. And so I'm proud to share that, because we do a lot of planning looking ahead. So what is this fiscal year? What are the technology asks? How are we going to track the benefits to multiple areas? I think when organizations work in a silo and revenue cycles priorities aren't understood by both the other finance teams and then the IT teams, you're setting it up for failure. And so one of the things we do repetitively throughout the fiscal year is we meet with our IT partners. We talk about where we're trying to go. We talk about what key metrics that technology is going to help. And then they are also an advocate when we get to the business justification portion, where they can speak on behalf of our projects just as well as we can. The reason we got there, though, is because we share success. So a revenue cycle implementation, the ROI from that can justify additional resources in an IT team that supports those project requests. And I think sharing that recognition, sharing the partnership, and celebrating the success with exposure to many different areas is really critical.
For sure. No, definitely that alignment is definitely vital. And I love that, like starting from sharing success. That's a great point. Jumping back to talking about tracking for a minute, what metrics or KPIs do you track most closely when evaluating a new revenue cycle technology, such as something like a claim scrubber or a patient financial engagement tool? And how do you make sure that it's delivering sustainable value?
Yeah. As a revenue cycle leader, I always try to link it back to cash. So what impact does it have to cash collections? Some of these examples, like a claim scrubber, you could say, well, it might not have a direct impact to cash, but I think in those, it has a direct impact to your team. And so you can kind of link it back to FTE savings. And it might not be a full FTE. And that's important to call out here, because sometimes you're not going to save a full FTE in a process, but you're upskilling your team, and the accuracy of the claims going out the door then has an impact as well. So that's one thing here. The other thing is, and we haven't really touched on this, but technology should always have an ROI, but some technology might not have as much of an ROI because it's an intangible benefit to the patient's financial experience throughout the process. That is extremely important to us, especially at Moffitt. We are an oncology center. The last thing that we want is for technology to be taking away from the patient's experience. So when we evaluate a process and we evaluate a new technology, it is a financial ROI, but it's also what's the ROI to the patient? Is it a seamless experience for them? Are they worrying less about, what's happening in the background or how they're interfacing with the portal? And every technology that has a patient experience impact actually goes through and gets presented to what's called our Patient and Family Advisory Committee. So they know that revenue cycle is thinking about the patient's experience when we're selecting technology. And they're just a wonderful group and always give us very valuable patient and caregiver feedback.
Right. That's great. I feel like you guys, and being in cancer care, you guys face so many unique considerations and unique and complex problems. So for my next question, NCI designated cancer centers like Moffitt, face these unique challenges, particularly also with complex payer mixes. So how is your team using digital tools to proactively manage patient financial journeys, and how do you measure success in patient satisfaction, but also revenue integrity?
Yeah. We're really proud of our revenue integrity function here at Moffitt. So we have a great partnership with all of our clinical teams. And we didn't really touch on that in the prior question, but we have, for the last decade, really been intentional about having relationships with both our nursing teams and all of our providers, and having physician champions that are involved in the revenue cycle technology implementation. That's incredibly important because then you get the provider's buy-in, which is really critical in terms of them understanding what's happening, even if they're not part of the workflow. From a revenue integrity perspective, I think it's critical to have technology in that space and to making sure that you're measuring the ROI on that technology. We've been doing this for almost a decade as well, and we call it strategic margin management. So we leverage technology to figure out if we are optimizing our charge capture opportunities, and then working with our clinical teams to ensure that they're aware of what rules and regulations are coming out, and make sure that they have the education and resources they need to do accurate charge entry, which then results in a net ROI for the organization. I would say patient satisfaction in rev cycle, one of our goals is that our patients know very little and feel very little about what's happening on the administrative side. And it's really just exceptions that we're reaching out to our patients, or proactive reach out if they have things like financial navigation services that are needed throughout that journey as well. And then just soliciting feedback, right? So making sure that our patient complaints or opportunities that come through were acted upon fast, they're remediated, we look at root cause, and we always put in an action plan so we don't replicate any opportunity in the future.
Okay, awesome. No, that's a great point. Yeah, definitely patient satisfaction. It's a huge piece to the puzzle, I imagine. So I just have our last question, kind of wrapping up the conversation here today. Looking ahead, what are you most excited for in the future of revenue cycle technology? I know there's a lot of new solutions coming to the table. So what are you excited about?
There's tons of new solutions. I would say the area of autonomous coding is really exciting to me, especially as it matures. This is an area for rev cycle leaders that it's really hard to fully staff health information management coding teams. Accuracy is key here. The other thing I'd say is just all of the generative AI tools that are out there. So this could apply to any administrative role, not even just revenue cycle, but what we've found is our teams are unleashing on things like leveraging Microsoft Copilot and helping that really make their process more efficient. And so it's leaning into the technology. And I think having the technology-enabled rev cycle only enhances with those types of tools. I am excited to see what my team comes up with, because they are already throwing in the use cases, and it really makes me happy to be part of a place that leans into technology and really celebrates the success around it.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's definitely so many more options coming to the table as well. I remember I was at the HMFA conference earlier this year, and revenue cycle technology definitely takes center stage there, for sure. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lynn. I think you gave us great perspective and great insight into this topic. So now this brings us to the Q&A portion of our program. So we'll like to invite the audience to ask live questions to our panelists. And just a little reminder, if you're participating in the live program, to submit a question, you can click on that little Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen, and it may already be open and be on the left side of your screen. So just note that questions will remain anonymous and won't be viewed by any other audience members. So we'll see if we got any questions before we wrap up. Alrighty, I'm not seeing any right now. Give you guys a few seconds just in case. Well, I'll go ahead with one last question to wrap us up. Lynn, what would you say are one or two key takeaways that you would want someone to walk away from today's discussion with?
Yeah. When you're trying to justify a technology and revenue cycle, don't overcomplicate the ROI. I'd say work with the vendor to make it easy, but also understanding that the approvals are going to come from areas outside of revenue cycle. So make it easy. It costs us X amount to do it internally. With this technology, we're going to go from, I'll say $100 to $5. That's really easy to understand. So that's the first one. And then I would say, make sure you ask the right questions during those demos. A lot of times we are sold the moon, and then when we get to implementation, it's like, oh, that didn't mean what I thought it meant. So encourage your IT teams to be part of all of those and encourage them to ask questions. We really ask all of our partners to challenge technology that we're excited about because they see it from a different lens.
For sure. No, I think that's great advice. And we do have one other question here. Could you please expand on the prevalence of AI and its application in RevCycle?
Sure. Well, we are looking to do a lot of very impressive things with AI, but I'll give just some administrative type things. A lot of us know prior authorization, payer policies, they're ever changing. And so historically, if we don't have a solution that does that, our team members are looking at what we'll call cheat sheets. You know, if you're in the office, they might even have them printed out and they become outdated over time. Well, with things like generative AI, you can, as long as it's within your network, you can upload all of those policies and all of your internal policies and help guide that workflow. So your team has a better way to know that they're doing their workflow accuracy. And so the quality of their work improves alongside with the productivity. So that's just one. We have a couple hundred use cases that have come from many different teams across Moffitt. And so I would say start small and then scale.
For sure. No, definitely great advice. And I believe, I'll give one last check. I think we are good. And we are pretty much out of time right now. So with that being all the time we have for today, thank you to our audience for joining us today. And just note that our next Winning Edge program is going to be on August 5th. And this will cover the Winning Edge for strengthening physician engagement and clinical efficiency. A live clickable link is going to appear at the close of this program, and that will take you to our registration page for the event. Remember to follow along all week long for continued coverage on investing in technology by visiting our website, healthleadersmedia.com. And so, Lynn, I just want to thank you one more time for an excellent discussion. And thank you to our audience for participating. We really hope you enjoyed today's program, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Winning Edge program, and that is on strengthening physician engagement and clinical efficiency. All right, thank you.